Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, Jeremy Crawford leaves Wizards of the Coast. What is the current state of the OSR? City of Arches is now available in US and Canada in hardcover. Sly Flourish Books are now available through a distributor to friendly local game shops. I have thoughts on the D&D 2024 Beholder, which I ran just Friday, 2 nights ago. How do RPGs die? We're going to talk about the death of RPGs. There are new one-on-one adventures in the Dragon Delves book coming out from Wizards of the Coast, and we'll offer a few tips for running one-on-one games. And we're going to cover our first batch of questions from the Patreon Q&A for this quarter, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm your pal, Mike Shea, here from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. This show is brought to you by the patrons of Sly Flourish. Patrons get access to all kinds of cool tips, tricks, tools, scenarios, adventures. They get the Q&A database. They get the talk show database. They get tons and tons of stuff, all downloadable, all self-hostable, so you can put them on your Raspberry Pi. And they get access to our awesome Lazy RPG community over on Discord, where we talk about all this stuff all week long. And you can support me directly by supporting me on Patreon. To the patrons of Sly Flourish, thank you so much for your support. Last week, we heard that Chris Perkins was leaving Wizards of the Coast. Jeremy Crawford is leaving Wizards of the Coast as well. Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins have been the two primary architects of the 2024 version of D&D, the D&D 2024 books. The two of them were kind of instrumental in putting it together, both from a lore and GMing standpoint and from a rules standpoint. They leave veterans behind, including James Wyatt and Wes Schneider. So we're going to see what happens with D&D now. So what does this mean? So now, if you think about it, Mike Mearls, Jeremy Crawford, and Chris Perkins were kind of the three. I mean, there was definitely other people involved in building the 2014 versions of D&D. Lots of people. Rodney Thompson was involved. Monty Cook was involved. Rob Schwab was involved. Lots of people were involved in the creation of D&D 2014. But the real three architects that were around were Jeremy Crawford, Chris Perkins, and Mike Mearls. And all three of them have left Wizards of the Coast at this point. You know, James White has been around Wizards of the Coast forever. Wes Schneider, I think, worked on Pathfinder and now works on Wizards of the Coast. And there's a bunch of other people that are involved. But there's a lot of it's a big shakeup for the design team of D&D. And a lot of people are trying to read into it. Like, what does it mean that they left? Well, I don't think it's that big a surprise. To me, it's a big surprise that they both left at the same time. I don't think it indicates anything going on at Wizards of the Coast. I don't think there's any sort of sinister underpinning nature of this. Doesn't mean there isn't one, but I wouldn't expect that this is an indicator of that. And I'm more surprised that both of them left at the same time than that either one of them left. Chris Perkins, I had heard, was looking to step away from D&D for a long time. I didn't really hear the same thing about Jeremy Crawford, but if you think about it, once you've designed a new core edition instance, both of them were involved in both the 2014 and the 2024 version. They've been working on this for 10 years. You can imagine that just making another book about giants or making another book about dragons is not exactly what they want to do with their lives. So I expect that they probably felt like it was time to move on, and they moved on. I don't think anybody could say what it means for the future of D&D. And I don't know right now how much it matters. It will probably matter in a few years, but it does not really matter right now, because the shortest amount of time, I think, until we would see another big revision of D&D would be like a minimum of 4 years. Right? That's about as small as it's gotten before. And if you think about it, it's going to take them a couple of years to even figure out where D&D 2024 sat, how well it did, before they start thinking about what they want to do next. Now, it could mean, and probably the biggest impact that we'll see from Wizards of the Coast as it relates to D&D over the next couple of years would be books like Xanathar's and Tasha's. I think we're already going to see some new character-driven books this year, which is already a little scary for me, right? That they're going to be putting out a new Artificer. They're going to be putting out new subclasses in a Forgotten Realms book, and that's all happening this year. So we're already going to see a lot of character options. My hope is that, generally speaking, GMs spend less energy on new character option books than they did in previous times. It felt like Xanathar's and Tasha's were sort of default new books. They were sort of patches on D&D that the expectation was that everybody would use them. And I don't think that's a healthy expectation. I think that we GM, they even say it in the beginning of those books, but I don't think we really think of it this way, that those books are optional books and that the GM decides what to include and what not to. I think we should really hang on to that and recognize that we get to include what we want to include in our game. I'm going to talk more about this and RPGs in general, but I think that that's something to consider. Which really means like, I don't know what the future of D&D is going to look like, but I also don't know how much it matters. I can't even imagine what a 6e would want to do. And I had this conversation with a friend of mine, this over Discord, about what 6e would even be like. A couple friends of mine, what 6e would even be like. And mine is like, imagine Jonathan Tweet and Rob Hainsey were hired by Wizards again and given free reign to make their own version of D&D. What would it look like? And the answer is 13th Age. And we have 13th Age. We have 13th Age Revision 2 coming out. What if they brought Rob Schwab back in and said, Rob, we want you to make a new version of D&D? Well, it would look a lot like Shadow the Weird Wizard. And we have that too. What if they brought in Matt Colville and James Intercasso and said, you guys make it? Well, then we'd have Draw Steel. We have all of these RPGs coming out. What if they brought Matt Mercer and said, hey, you're super successful. What would you do if you had an RPG? It would probably be Daggerheart. So we have so many new big high fantasy RPGs. And that's just 4 off the top of my head. We have these big high fantasy RPGs that take the game in lots of different directions. What do I need 6e to do for me that those other ones aren't doing? That's the big question for me. And the answer is I can't think anything. I'm pretty good. I'm happy with what I've got. I'm happy with what's coming out. I've got all different editions. What if they said, man, what we really want is a classic D&D? Well, guess what? That's what Shadow Dark is. So we have all these games, right? We already have them all. So I'm less dependent upon what Wizards needs to do with the brand and everything like that. I kind of don't care. And of course, the digital tools and everything like that, we wonder what they're going to do with that. So it's not like what they do has no impact at all in the hobby. But I think like once these core books have been, now that they're released, and when we get the 5.2 SRD, which we're still waiting for, I wonder what the latest status is on the 5.2 SRD. I'd sure love to know. And the new starter set, which is coming out later this year. Those are really the big impact products. I've mentioned this before. Like those to me are the big ones. So what does it mean with like Jeremy and Kirsten leaving? I mean, it's going to change things. It could be for the best, right? It could be new ideas coming in, new things coming out, whole new ways of thinking about the game. That could be great. It could, we don't know where it's going to go. So we're going to have to see. Anyway, it is very interesting. And it is a pretty high impact idea that both of the 2 lead designers of D&D 2024 have both left Wizards of the Coast now that it's been released. There was we're talking about like the games and how they work and everything goes on. There was a wonderful State of the OSR panel at GaryCon this last year that was recorded on the Ship of the Dead podcast. I will link to it down in the show notes. It was a really, really interesting podcast with 4 designers of various things. Yochai Gall was there. Matt Finch was there, Kelsey Dion was there, and Luke Stratton was there. Wonderful podcast. Really, really good. And very funny. Like, boy, talk about super creative, super funny people that were talking about their hobby. And they would say things like, the very first question was like, what is the OSR? And everybody just laughed, right? Like, are you seriously? Like, that's where we're going to start? It's a 4-hour conversation. We're all going to disagree. And they said, okay, fine. What does OSR stand for? And they went, not getting any better, right? We still can't decide what OSR stand for. And then they were like, Kelsey Dion was talking about how she knew she made it when she had so many people telling her that Shadow Dark isn't truly OSR. She's like, Shadow Dark's not OSR. And Matt Finch said, don't worry, the same people can't decide whether or not D&D 2nd edition counts as OSR or not. Right? It was like, what is and isn't OSR is like this huge thing, So it was a really, really, I just finished it today. I've been listening to it over a few days, and it was just a really, really good, very funny panel. I highly recommend it. If you are interested, I think if you're interested in RPGs overall, fantasy RPGs, D&D, and old school style games, I think you can definitely get a lot out of this podcast. It was a really, really fun podcast. I learned a lot. I laughed a lot. I really dug it. The State of the OSR. And I think it was on the panel where they stated a question that spawned the big topic that we're going to talk about today, which was, I think the question was, is the OSR dying? It follows Betteridge's law of headlines, which is, if you ask a question like, is the OSR dying? The answer is almost always no. But it did bring up the question of like, well, what does it mean for an RPG to die? Which is a topic that we're going to talk about today, because I think it's very interesting. I think there's some useful bits of the conversation to have about that. Fantastic podcast. City of Arches is now available in hardcover to US and Canada. You can pick it up right on the Sly Flourish bookstore. You will find a link down in the show notes. If you live in the United States or Canada, you can pick it up. If you live overseas, please don't try to buy it. If you try to buy it, we're going to have to end up refunding your money because we are not able to sell it overseas yet. The books are making their way across the sea as we speak. They will probably, then we have to fulfill our Kickstarter backers over there, and then we will put it up for sale. It'll probably be about a month from now before it is available outside of the United States and Canada. But you can pick it up, and you can pick up the digital version. And for those who live outside of US and Canada who buy the digital version, you can receive a coupon from us for $20 off the hardcover when it is available, so that way you are not paying extra. We reached out to all of the people who bought the digital package on the store to offer a coupon. However, because of opt-out requirements, we could not email those who opted out of the newsletter. If you bought on the bookstore the digital package and you wanted the hardcover, please email support@slyflourish.com. If you email support@slyflourish.com, and please include a receipt of your order so we can see it, so we don't have to look it up and spend a lot of time on it, we will send you a coupon code for $20 off so that you can pick up the hardcover for $49.99. $20 off the hardcover so that you're not paying the extra $20 for getting the digital version of the book. Email support. But yeah, it's now, Kickstarter backers in US and Canada should all have them. And now it is available for sale as well. If you have any problems with any of your orders, as always, email support@slyflourish.com and we will help you out. So excited about this book. So happy to have it in print. So happy to see so many people that have it in print. Huge weight off of me. Like, it's one of these things where you're like, man, I'm sitting on this thing and I really want to get it out there. And now it's out there. I'm very, very happy. But I'll be even happier when we deliver it to all of our backers overseas as well. Speaking of Sly Flourish, as some know, my wife is now full-time on Sly Flourish as well. So Michelle and I both run our little enterprise known as Vorpal Quill LLC, which runs Sly Flourish and everything else. And we have made some of our books available through distribution, through ACD distribution. So if you are a friendly local game shop with a local presence and you would like to sell Sly Flourish books at your local shop, and I don't know why you wouldn't, because everybody loves these books. They're the best thing ever. You can pick them up through ACD distribution. They're now available. I will link down to the link to ACD distribution so that you can order these books. We want to see how they do, and then we will hopefully add City of Arches to this as well. So we're figuring it out. This is the first time we've done in-store distribution of books from Sly Flourish. So we're testing it all out, see how it works, and figure out how all that happens. But if you are a friendly local game, if you are listening to the show and you're a friendly local game shop, you can check ACD distribution for our books. And you can also find a link in the show notes to our store page on ACD in order to order them for your store at wholesale costs. This past Friday, I had the opportunity to run the D&D 2024 Beholder. So in this case, we had 6 10th level characters, which is definitely a pretty powerhouse group to face a Beholder. So I'm not going to talk so much about the balance of the Beholder as in like a challenge to its group. Also because, boy, when I talked about the Dracolich, I had a million people telling me I did it wrong and telling my players they all did it wrong. You guys weren't there. You don't know what happened. And same way on the Friday game. You weren't there. You don't know what happened. You're going to have to trust me when I give you my assessment of what occurred. How'd the Beholder work? Very well. I really like the Beholder. And so far, I got to say, like, I'm really enjoying the monsters that are in the D&D 2025 Monster Manual. They're running really well. I would certainly, this I can say pretty unequivocally, if I had to grab a book for monsters, for 5e monsters, between the 2014 version of D&D and the 2024 version of D&D, i.e. I have it right here. Look at this. If I've got the old 2014 Monster Manual and I have the new D&D 2024 2025 Monster Manual, I would definitely grab the 2025 Monster Manual. It is definitely a better Monster Manual as far as I'm concerned. There are things to pick at. There are things to, be annoyed with, as we are nerds and gamers who love our hobby very much. It is very easy for us to complain, but definitely it is a better book. And so far, when I've been running these sort of bigger legendary monsters, which to me is like a good indicator of like how well the mechanics work and stuff like that, they've run fine. They've run very, very well. That doesn't mean there's always room for improvement and little tips that we can learn. So what's the main thing I noticed from the new Beholder, the Beholder from 2025 Monster Manual Beholder? Number one is how its anti-magic cone works. The old anti-magic cone from the 2014 Beholder, which we can also take a look at in D&D Beyond, for now, till they take it away. You don't need the old Beholder. You don't want that. I don't know if they'll ever. I don't know. I don't know that they'll ever take it away. I don't know why they would. I joke, but I don't think they take it away. But it doesn't mean that if they change the site, it won't go down. Wizards kills digital stuff. I've seen them do it. They've done it before. No reason they wouldn't. But I don't think they'll. I don't know why they would take it out of the compendium. Anyway, here is the old one, and the anti-magic cone is the big one. The beholder's central eye creates an area of anti-magic as the anti-magic field spell in a 150-foot cone. At the start of each of its turn, the beholder decides which way the cone faces and whether the cone is active. The area works against the beholder's own eye rays. So this was a pain in the ass, because this basically meant that at the beginning of your turn, you had to decide where you're going to put the beam before you fired off any rays, which means you would move your anti-magic cone to whoever you want to move the anti-magic cone to, and then you'd blast other people with rays. That was a pain. I didn't really like that. The new beholder changes this in a really good way. It's now a bonus action. Anti-magic cone. The beholder's central eye emits an anti-magic wave in a 150-foot cone. Until the start of the beholder's next turn, that area acts as an anti-magic field spell, and that area works against the beholder's own eye rays. Seems almost the same. The main difference is at the beginning of its turn, it goes poof, and it goes off. And then you blast people with a bunch of eye rays. You can fire off 3 eye rays at anybody because the eye is not up, and then boop, and then you fire it back up again at the end of the turn, right? And that is a really good thing. You drop it and then pop it back up, drop it and then pop it back up. And you can decide which direction, where you want to put it, and what you want to do with it. So that made the beholder a far more runnable monster in the game that I ran. When I ran it in Theater of the Mind. They were in kind of a large hallway, and the hall had ways that they could kind of go past the beholder, so they could kind of switch sides around the beholder. And then I would basically say the eye is, I just had 2 zones, front and back. You were either, in the front or the back, and then it would decide which way it's doing the eye. So I was basically like half the field was always under an eye ray, which I think was pretty fair. And then the characters would be like, oh, I'm running to the front. And then I had other tricks for it. So that was the main thing that worked. It felt like its hit points were a little low. 190 hit points was a little low. I think that's about, 190 divided by 13. So it's about 15 hit points per challenge rating. Which is on the low, that's right. It's not low, but it's on the lower end of my thing. And when I was running 6 10th level characters, I beefed up its hit points to 260, right? I gave it 20 hit points per CR, and that worked fine. You should always feel free. This is not really a complaint about the monsters in the book. Always feel free to change the monster hit points. Up it by add or subtract 50%. Well, you should feel free to add up to 50% of its hit points. And you should be feel free to subtract all of the hit points you want to subtract to make it stay as long as it should stay while it's successful, and feel free to give it 1 hit point when it's time for it to go. So always feel free. One tip I would give in general with all the monsters is you get to manipulate hit points however you want. Go ahead and manipulate it based on the feelings, based on the vibes, as they say. Or specifically, like in my case of saying, like, I know there's a lot of characters here. There's more characters than the game expects there to be. I'm going to increase its hit points significantly to account for that, because they're going to all punch that thing in the face, right? Everyone hates beholders and they can punch in the face. So that was the main thing I noticed. One, I also really like that the eye rays now do damage. A lot of these eye rays do psychic damage. The charm ray does 13 psychic damage, and even half on a success. There's a lot of these. The fear ray does psychic damage. The slowing ray does necrotic damage, right? There's a lot of rays that used to only do an effect and now do an effect and damage. I really dig that. I think that works. I think that works really well. What else? So here's a big tip for running beholders in general. I noticed this when I ran beholders before. So here's one you can get experience. It is just as important with the new beholder as it is with the old beholder, which is you want to pair it up with monsters that have blind sight or tremor sense. And the reason why is the best players, if you are a player of D&D, stop listening. Go do something else for a while. This is just a conversation between me and Game Masters. All right, Game Masters, are you back? Are you here? You made sure all the players stop listening? The most effective way to screw a beholder is to fill it up with things like fog cloud or darkness. Get rid of its ability to see. People talk about how fog cloud is a useless spell. It destroys beholders. It makes a beholder basically useless because every one of its abilities requires that it sees its target, right? Every one of them, is a 3 rise at random, choosing one of 3 targets. It can see all of its eye rolls. It must be able to see them, right? That is a huge deal. And yes, the anti-magic cone will suppress magical stuff like that. But if it's suppressing the magical stuff like that, it can't also hit them with eye rays, right? Because as soon its own central eye. So it makes it really effective. So the way to counteract that effect, in my opinion, overly effective. That makes the beholder far too easy to deal with if you throw up a fog cloud. The way to deal with that is give the beholder monsters and sidekicks that can see through, that have blind sight. The advantage there is the players very likely can't see through their fog cloud either. They can't see through darkness or fog cloud either. And now if you throw the fog cloud and the darkness on the beholder can just move. It can float up out of it, right? It can get outside of it and then start pegging you with eye rays again. But a lot of time the characters will be like, well, we'll get in the wall of fog, or we'll get in the darkness area, and then it can't see us at all, right? That's when your blind sight monsters go over and punch the hell out of the people that are inside the fog cloud, particularly those people who are concentrating on that spell, because they have advantage on all attacks and disadvantage to hit them. They are much more effective inside those areas than they're not. So there's a whole bunch of different monsters that fit this role. Mesoloths are really good with beholders. Ankegs, helmed horrors, hook horrors, umber hulks, they all have some semblance of this. And a lot of those could be creatures that the beholder has conscripted to defend it. So that works really well. That way, if the beholder gets obscured or can't see its targets, it can send those guys in to go punch the hell out of those people. That's my biggest tip for running a beholder. Another big tip I would have is when so the eyes are randomly selected, right? Beholder shoots 3 of the following magical rise at random, re-rolling duplicates. You get to choose who they use them against, though. So even though you're rolling the eyes randomly, you get to choose which targets they choose with it. And beholders are smart, right? They got a 17 intelligence. They're going to know to focus those eyes on the ones most effective. The ones that are wisdom saving throws, they do on big dumb melee types. The ones that are constitution, they do on scrawny ass spellcaster types. So you get to pick which eyes are most effective against which characters. You can also cheat and pick your eyes, right? You could run through a list and decide it's going to use this eye, and this eye this time. So if you want a more effective beholder, you could choose which eyes it's going to use against which targets specifically. And maybe you roll randomly for the legendary action ones. Another tip is if you're, in my case, I didn't do this, but I kind of wish I had. In my case, so 5th edition D&D, both 2014 and 2024, expect that you are running with 4 characters. So if you're running with more characters than that, a legendary monster is going to be less effective. Now, of course, they could be more effective by throwing in other monsters, but you could also be more effective by giving it more legendary actions. And the way to think of it is instead of having a monster that basically does 3 legendary actions, you instead, I'm on the wrong one. I'm looking at the wrong beholder. Let's go to the other one. You could instead give it 1 legendary action for every character minus 1. So if there are 6 characters in the group, you could give it 5 legendary actions instead of 3, right? For every creature above 4 that they're facing, you could add another legendary action. That will make the monster act far more effectively against a larger group. It's dangerous to do. That's a lot of extra stuff, but that's an option that you have available to you. It's another way, like manipulating hit points. You can also manipulate the amount of output that a monster does by increasing its number of legendary actions to account for the fact that you're facing 5 or 6 characters instead of 4. So that's something you can do. So those are my tips for the beholder. The main tips are feel free to change its hit points up and down in order to fit the number of characters that you got and in order to fit the theme of the situation, particularly because boss monsters need help. And beholder, there's hardly more aggressive, characters are going to be super aggressive towards beholders. Like beholders are even more risky than boss monsters because players they really want to punch people in that central eye. So feel free to increase its hit points, hell, double them if you want, right? You can do whatever you want with them. 2 is make sure that you have blind sight or tremor sense monsters that are guarding them to account for characters that throw up or ways to blind the beholder or stop the beholder from using its eye rays. And then 3 is feel free to add additional eye rays for one additional eye ray for every character above 4. And that way it will be constantly pinging out eye rays. But general assessment is big thumbs up. I like the new beholder was really good. I really liked it. My characters the players really liked it. They made their saves all the time, which is kind of a bummer, but they did take a bunch of damage anyway. They were still really scared, and I think they really felt like things worked well. So it was fun facing the beholder. Real classic D&D game. So those are my thoughts on the beholder. Can RPGs die? How do RPGs die? This topic came up to me because I saw a little bit of I don't even think it was clickbait. I think it was just sort of like, hey, we're going to talk about this. And I thought it was related to the state of the OSR where somebody said is the OSR dying? was like a premise. And it was kind of a ridiculous premise. And anybody that knows anything about what's going on with the OSR knows it's not dying, right? The OSR is actually exploding in ways that are, like, man, the number of cool OSR products coming out is tremendous. But to me, it brought up a more interesting question. So it's like, can RPGs die overall? And boy, if you go hit YouTube and you go look at like clickbaity thumbnails, and by the way, I'm probably going to create a clickbaity thumbnail for this, but for a good cause. It's for a good cause. I don't know what my clickbaity thumbnail is going to be. Could be like, can RPGs die? Or is your RPG dead? I don't know. I'm going to come up with, can RPGs die might be the clickbait thumbnail. Or how do RPGs die? Or are RPGs dying? That would be a real quick, are RPGs dying? And then that hits the law of headlines, which is no, of course they're not. But it brings up an interesting question, which is like, how do RPGs die? Can they die? How do they die? What does dead even mean? Is kind of this big philosophical question. We don't deal with philosophical questions here on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. We talk about practical things you can do. So why does this matter? This is not just a theoretical, philosophical question to argue about on various message forums. This to me is a practical matter. And what I want you to get from this is rethink about what a dying RPG means to you, and change. If you feel like RPGs are brittle, I want to help you build a more resilient view of RPGs so that you can recognize that it takes a lot to hurt an RPG. It takes a lot to kill an RPG. There are I think very few really dead RPGs. And I think this is particularly important now. And that's because I'm pretty sure my statistics are right on this. Most tabletop role-playing game players today have only ever had one edition of D&D, and that's the 2014 version of D&D, the D&D 5e 2014. And now we have D&D 2024. And this is a new thing for a lot of people. This idea of a new edition coming out is a new thing for a lot of people. And we might not all have like the best mental grasp of what that means. And people can think something is dying when all it means is, no, it's doing slightly less than it did before. So my goal for this is to help you recognize how strong RPGs are and change your perspective on what a dying RPG is like if you felt like RPGs can die or die frequently or whatever. So the main thing I want you to take away is that it takes a lot for an RPG to really die. It takes an awful lot for an RPG to die. I'm going to give you a pop quiz right now, and I want you to write it down. You can leave a comment before, if you're on YouTube, you can leave a comment, or you can write it down on a 3x5 card. Don't bother to mail it to me, but you can write it down on a 3x5 card. Here's a pop quiz for you. The pop quiz is, which version of D&D do you consider to be the most dead? I have one in my mind. I think there's one version of D&D that is deader than all of the others. And I'm curious if you can figure out what that version is. Specifically to Wizards of the Coast D&D, not other D&D-like games, but actual D&D. Which one would you consider to be dead? So write that down. If you are in their Discord, if you're on our Twitch chat, what do you think it is? And already I see a bunch of people who have figured it out. So we'll come to that at the end of this conversation. It takes a lot for an RPG to die. So when I was thinking about this, I was talking about it with my wonderful and beautiful wife, Michelle. I was thinking about, well, what are the levels of death, right? What are the layers of like what it means for an RPG to die? And it's kind of like a ladder. And at the top of the ladder is the first indication that you might get that an RPG is quote unquote dying, but it really isn't. And then at the bottom is like almost truly dead. Right, a truly dead RPG. And I kind of feel like you have to hit the bottom of the ladder before you're actually a dead RPG. But some people start to think things are dying when you just start to get the indicators at the top. So what is this ladder, right? And again, the top of the ladder is the least important thing when it comes to like the quote unquote death of the RPG. And the first is like when your favorite version of D&D is no longer the current version of D&D, some people say, well, the old version is now dead. Right. And by the way, a lot of my thoughts on this came from a really excellent number of posts over on EN World. I posted this question over on EN World, and there was a really good discussion about it over there. I read all the posts. I thought about it a lot. So a lot of the things that you're seeing in this conversation are stuff that I heard people talking about. And some people did say, like, when a publisher stops publishing the game, it's dead. They considered it dead once a publisher stopped publishing a game. And many people jumped on this. That means every version of D&D is dead except D&D 2024, right? Like, and that doesn't feel right to most people, right? The idea that every other version of D&D is dead except D&D 2024 does not feel right to people. And that's why I'm putting it right at the top. The idea that once a publisher stops publishing it, that it's dead, that's about the least of that can happen for an RPG, for it to actually die. And it's not, in my opinion, that isn't really any indication that it is dead. But it's certainly like some people's indication of that it's dying. The explosive curve of an RPG's popularity begins to level off, right? This is like companies must, swim like sharks. They're either moving or they're dead, right? And that idea that like if your D&D has had an exponential growth curve over the past few years, I think that has slowed down now. And the idea is the minute that it started to slow down, people are like, oh my God, it's dying. Right? They felt like the minute the curve changed, the minute it was no longer an exponential gain in new people that were playing the game, is the minute they're like the RPGs are dead, right? Or D&D is dead. So some people took that. The main publisher no longer publishes that version of the game is another indicator of like, oh, does that mean it's dead? Like once a publisher says, oh, I've stopped making that version. Is Pathfinder, this would be an example, Pathfinder 1 is no longer being published. Pathfinder 2 is. Does that mean Pathfinder 1 is dead? No, lots of people are playing Pathfinder 1, right? So is the main publisher no longer publishing material for it? Is for some people an indicator that it is dying or dead? I don't think so. Third-party publishers are no longer supporting it. For some people, the growth of third-party products that you can go and find new stuff for it, does that mean it's dead? This is that good example. There's a lot of material being published for BX, right? For BX D&D, which is 50 years old, or close to 50 years old, right? That when you think about old school games that are being published, and they're being published with compatibility for that, well, that means that like the oldest versions of D&D still have third-party publishers making stuff for them. So there's lots of times where third-party publishers are still supporting it. But when they stop, does that mean it's dead? Well, some RPGs never had any third-party support. Even if they had an open license, not a lot of people made stuff for them. So you can't really take that as an indicator that it's dead. But, for some people, it's a level of dying. You can't find games of it playing at any conventions. If you go to gaming conventions and you take a look at the rosters of different games, if you don't see your game on there, does that mean the game is dead? Well, that could be an indicator, right? Oh, it's less popular than it was. This gets to a really important consideration. And that's why this is getting closer to the bottom of the ladder, right? If all of these other things are true, you can't find anybody publishing any more stuff for it. The publishers themselves don't publish for it. And you can't find any games at conventions. Now it's starting to get a little bit more risky for the RPG. You can't even find a group to play it. Right? No, you looking around and looking for any GMs that are running this game that you love, or any GMs out there playing this thing, and you can't find anybody running it, and you can't find a group to join, that might be an indicator. You can't even convince your own group to play it, right? You're like, hey, I found this old RPG. I went and blew the dust off of it, right? And you're like, hey, does anybody want to play this? And I'm like, nah, I don't know if that's for me, right? If you can't get a group to play for it, even if you're willing to run the game, that's an indicator. And then kind of finally at the bottom is you can't even find a copy of it at all. You don't even know it exists. No one can get a hold of it anymore. There aren't any physical versions available. You can't find it on eBay. There's no one selling the PDF of it. That's kind of the bottom of the ladder. That's a game that's truly dead. There are just no copies of it available anywhere. No one's running it. No one can play it. It's not at any conventions. No one's publishing for it. No, the publisher has long since abandoned it, and you cannot find copies of it. And there are games like this. There are games where like literally no one is making it anymore, and there are no copies available anymore. So that is kind of the levels, the layers of death, the ladder of death for an RPG that I would describe. There are probably other variants in here, and I am sure you have kind of your own thoughts on this, and I would be happy to hear those thoughts on comments. But those to me are like the levels. So then what makes RPGs really resilient? That some RPGs I think are more resilient to these levels of dying than others. And there's certain things that RPGs can do to make themselves resilient. One is being downloadable in PDF. If you can go buy it and download it in PDF, that means even if you stop selling it in PDF, people still have the PDF copies. That is important. Being able to buy it in print, or that it was ever in print, means that there are physical copies that are out there somewhere. I think having both of these, being able to sell it in PDF and having it in print, those are both make a RPG very resilient. That idea that I can download my copy and have it on my hard drive, other people have it on their hard drives, it can be archived, it can be found again, people can have it again, even if the websites go down, right? Even if the publisher no longer sells it, if stores no longer sell it, you don't find it, you still have these physical versions that are out there. That makes it really resilient. Games that have one-on-one or solo play, I think, are more resilient, because that idea that you can't find a group or you can't, find people to play it. Well, with a solo game, it doesn't matter. If it's just you, then you've got a player, right? And examples of this are like Ironsworn, which is very popular, actually. Ironsworn is a very strong RPG, but you can play it solo. Thousand-Year-Old Vampires, another RPG. These are just two. There are many solo RPGs, but these are two I'm picking out because they're two that I've played myself. As long as I've got my physical copy of Thousand-Year-Old Vampire, which I do upstairs, right? And I got the PDF, and I play, that game can never die. As long as I'm around. And I'm guessing I'm not the only one. If that copy is sitting there and you can play it solo, then that is a super resilient RPG. It is really hard to kill a 1,000-year-old vampire, both metaphorically and physically. It is both hard to kill a vampire and hard to kill that game because it's playable by yourself. You don't even need a group. If you have a copy and you're the only one in the world that has a copy, it is still not dead. Games that have open licenses are a lot less likely to truly die because people can always blow the dust off of that license and build another version of it or build another game. This is that idea that like the 3.5 SRD is out there, the 5.1 SRD is out there. Other game systems have their open design documents out there, which means they're free to distribute, they're free to move around. Copies of that game can live because you can share them legally, which is something you can't always do with like the PDF of a game itself. Open licenses mean that games are a lot less likely to be killed. That example of like when Wizards of the Coast decided to abandon D&D 3.5 and move to 4E, Pathfinder picked up the ball and they made a new version. They said, hey, we've got players that are still interested in 3.5. We're interested in writing for it. We have experience writing for it. We're going to keep it going. And they did, right? So that is an example of where a game could have been dead, D&D 3.5, or dying anyway, and it resurged, right? And it resurged for a long time. Now they've kind of left it aside and switched over to Pathfinder 2, which is really different than D&D 3.5 was. So then there's that question. But there's still a lot of people playing Pathfinder 1, and there's still a lot of people playing D&D 3.5. So open licenses help considerably. Another one is RPGs that are not tied to an external IP. So a lot of times the people that of RPGs brought up that were dying or dead were those that had an external IP with a limited license and the license was revoked. Your Marvel superhero RPGs, the 007 RPG, RPGs that were tied to other bigger properties, and that other bigger property pulled the license and that the publisher could no longer publish them. And you can't build an open version of the game because it had all that IP in there. So there are examples where those games then switch to their own. An example is the Dragon Age RPG from Green Ronin. They now have the Age system, Fantasy Age, which is separate from Dragon Age. So they still managed to keep a version of that game alive, even when they don't have necessarily the IP. But there's a lot of different Star Wars RPGs out there that have kind of come and gone. And even those are living still, right? They're just, you can't really buy them again. They're not really for sale because the license was pulled. So one thing that makes games brittle, in my opinion, is when they are tied to an external IP with a limited license. That means they are more likely to be dead. We're going to come back at the end of the show or at the end of this talk about what is the only edition that D&D that I consider truly dead. But don't forget. Dead gods and zombies. This was two metaphors that I really love that came up on the EN World thread. One of them was dead gods, which is the definition of an RPG dying is the same as a god dying in D&D. And that's that the gods only die when no one thinks about them anymore, when no one believes in them, when no one worships them anymore, then they're truly dead. And I think that's true for RPGs too. As long as somebody still cares, that RPG could still be alive. Right? I think even with those ones that are tied to IPs, even with like the ones where the publishers aren't publishing anymore, even if you can't find groups at conventions, if somebody cares enough to go find the 5 other people in the world who want to play that game, it's still alive. You could be your own little secret cult that worships just that one tiny little RPG that no one else even knows anything about. It's still alive. But the bigger gods are there when the more people worship them. And in the same way, bigger RPGs will stay around the more people are playing them. That's kind of that idea that an RPG can only die when people stop believing in it. is, I thought, a powerful idea, a powerful bit of resilience. And then zombies. Somebody brought up zombie RPGs. A zombie RPG is an RPG that was all but dead. It basically didn't exist anymore. No one was paying attention to it. And then someone found it, and they're like, wow, look at this. And they blow the dust off and say, wow, I found this old RPG that's only written on dot matrix form-fed paper, but we're going to try it out. And suddenly it becomes alive again. You can wake them up. These dead gods that float around where you can wake them back up again and bring them back to life. This is one of the only areas, like I do not condone piracy. I think it is much better for companies to engage well with their customers, to offer things like PDFs of products instead of burying it behind siloed digital tools that can go away and thus make it much harder to get digital versions of products later. But some people definitely brought up that like piracy is a way for these games to stay alive, that a lot of times games that aren't in print anymore, aren't published anymore, still are floating around out there on the dark web with the mushrooms, I guess, and that they can still exist because they float around. Again, I'm not condoning it, but it is a way that games manage to stay alive, is that piracy has a tendency to kind of bring back these dead RPGs to life. So in my opinion, when it comes to those RPGs that are actually dead, what it takes to actually kill an RPG, you're really talking about a game that basically nobody still cares about. You cannot find versions of it available. You cannot buy it. You cannot find licenses. There's no open licenses for it. Nobody seems to have a copy, and no one's really running those games. That's really like what a dead RPG looks like. And now we'll come to the answer on which version of D&D is truly dead. And as this is just like my opinion, man, and I'm not even sure that I would say that it is truly dead, but it sure feels that way. And that is the 3.0 version of D&D. If you go to the DM Guild, the DM's Guild, or DriveThruRPG, you can buy every previous version of D&D up through 4th edition, including all of the 4th edition books. They're all available in PDF, except the 3.0 version of D&D. You can get D&D 3.5, but you can't get 3.0. And I don't really hear many people complaining about the fact that you can't get 3.0. Again, I don't even know if it's available. Like, I don't know if people made PDFs of it that you could go pirate or anything like that. And again, I don't condone piracy. But I don't even know if there are that many floaty versions around there. I don't know that I've seen a 3.0 version of the SRD where it was different back then. It's very rare for me to see anybody that talks about running a 3.0 game instead of a 3.5 game. And I think that it is close enough that people don't care. It only existed for about 3 years, right? 3.0 was only around for about 3 years before they made a 3.5. And Wizards was very big on like pushing everybody to move to 3.5, moving all the publishers to 3.5. Basically all the publishers at the time shifted over to 3.5. So, somebody just brought up, so maybe it's not dead. There is a 3.0 SRD available on archive.org. I will go link to that. That's interesting. And because it's an open license, we can go legally get it. But really, that to me is the closest version of D&D that really shows as dead, that it is really hard to find. You can still find physical copies of it, but it's harder to get a PDF copy. It's way easier to get every other version of D&D, BX, BECMI, the Rules Cyclopedia, 1st edition D&D, 2nd edition D&D, 3.5, 4th edition. All of those are available in PDF. I sure wish the D&D 2014 books were available in PDF. I don't have a feeling we're going to see them showing up on DriveThruRPG. It would be super, super cool, Wizards of the Coast, if you were to take the old 3 core books just for archival purposes, just for historical purposes, and make those available as PDFs on DriveThruRPG. I would buy the hell out of those. I would love to have it. And, they're out of print now, right? You've got D&D 2024. How about you give us the PDFs of those old ones? That would be really, really cool. Please, Wizards of the Coast, consider that. But yeah, that version of 3.0 feels like the only version that is not really available. Several says that the Holmes Basic is not in PDF. Is that right? I know is the Menzer Basic version, which is the red cover. Is that true? Can nobody find the Holmes Basic? Which one is the Holmes Basic? Lord Gazuba says 78, the Blue Book. The Blue Book is not available? It's not available on DriveThruRPG? Is that available in that big book? You remember the big archive book? That giant D&D history book that came out? Is the Holmes one not in there? It's not in there either. Wow. Yeah, so maybe that's the true dead. That's the true dead version. So folks here in chat are bringing up that the Holmes version is not available on DriveThruRPG as well. So is that considered a dead version? A lot of people remembered it. And another friend of the show, Ruthrug, Our sacrificial, our cult sacrifice, Ruthreg accidentally got banned one day because I clicked on the wrong name and banned him, and I had to bring him back, and that was very sad. But he's here, and he brings up a very good question where he says, given the reasoning for 3.0 being dead, does that mean 2014 is at risk? I don't think so, for a couple of reasons. One is that D&D 2014 was around for 10 full years before D&D 2024 came out. And there are millions of copies of that book. I bet you there are more copies of the D&D 2014 Player's Handbook than any other book that exists for RPGs. I would be willing to bet that's true. They've done so many new print runs of that book. And that means it's going to be available for sale for a long time on the used market. The fact that there isn't a PDF legally, I'll mark that legally, there is no PDF available, that also puts it at more risk. So a little bit, but I don't think it's nearly the same risk that 3.0 has. I think that you will probably be able to get 2014 stuff. And also the 2014 system reference document is available and been around for a long time. So I don't think that one's much at risk. Anyway, the main point is RPGs are super resilient. It takes a whole lot for an RPG to die. The next time you are worried about your favorite RPG dying, you don't need to worry about it. If you're not a brand new player, but if you've been starting to play D&D in the past 10 years, and now you're starting to look and be like, they're leaving me behind. Well, guess what? Wizards of the Coast has been leaving people behind for 50 years. They've been always going on to the new thing, and they've always been publishing new stuff, and many, many millions of people have been left behind. Like we have. You don't have to feel like you're left behind. You always have your favorite version of D&D. You can always play it. You can always run it. It is almost always available. Only in very rare circumstances does a version of D&D usually die. And that is almost always because nobody really cares about it that much anymore. I don't know if that's true about the Holmes version of D&D. Maybe I have to take that back. You know, the Holmes version may be one. But again, like, people will always bring it back. So if this is your first time of seeing an edition change, you don't have to worry. Your version of D&D is strong. You get to play the one that you want to play. You can play it for as long as you like, as long as you have the books, as long as you have friends willing to play it, you will have that version of D&D. It takes a whole lot to kill D&D. It takes a whole lot to kill RPGs. And I think that's one of the reasons I really love this hobby as much as I do. Speaking of new D&D books, one of the new books, I'm when it comes to new books that Wizards of the Coast is publishing, I plan to treat them the same way that I treat every other published book, which is either like when there's, and Wizards is not going to be doing a Kickstarter anytime soon, but a book has to be out for me to be willing to talk about it. But I thought there was something interesting about the new Dragon Delves book that's coming out. So there's a new book. It's a bunch of different adventures that surround dragons that kind of goes for a bunch of different level ranges that's coming out in July from Wizards of the Coast. James Wyatt is the senior designer that worked on the book. It sounded cool. I didn't really think that it was big news. But then there was one part of it I was like, ooh, that is big news. This is something that I really like. I'm very excited about, and I'm glad to see them doing, and I wanted to talk about it. And that's solo adventures. That this book of adventures is going to include solo adventures. I think there are 3 of them. Yeah, 3 adventures that they're calling solo adventures. They're not really solo in the same way that I think of solo, and that's something that Christian Hoffer, who did the interview with James Wyatt on this, brings up, which is not solo, it's one-on-one. So there are 3 one-on-one adventures that are in this book. When we talk about the resiliency of the RPG, when we talk about the resiliency of D&D and our ability, the hardest part is getting groups together to play. And one of the things that's really awesome was when you can play the game with just you and one player. Now, a lot of people don't do this. A lot of people don't play D&D with one player and one DM. I have, and I love it. It is really fun to play one-on-one D&D. It's a really fun style of game. In my mind, I've talked about it before, but I haven't talked about it in a little while. The one-on-one D&D has significant advantages over playing with a group. And not that many disadvantages. It is not a lesser way to play D&D. It's not a lesser way to play RPGs. It is a different way to play RPGs, but it is really a fun way. And I'll give you 2 really good reasons why one-on-one play is so much fun. The first is its scheduling is so much easier. The games are faster. They move quickly. You can play a lot in an hour. And it's way easier to schedule when it's just you and one other person. You just have to get together. You could play with a friend over lunch. You could play with your significant other at home. You can play with a friend online. It's so much easier to schedule you and one other person. Like, you could just play ad hoc. Hey, do you have an hour? Yeah. You want to play some D&D? Sure. Bang, you're done. Right? The scheduling is so much easier. That is one. Speed and time and the amount of things that happen in the game is far higher. And then the other big advantage is you get to focus the game around the character. When you're building a game around 4, 5, 6 players and 4, 5, or 6 characters, the stories of those characters are constantly like weaving in and out. You can never really focus the whole game on one character because you got 5 other people that'd be really bored. Or they'd all feel kind of left out because like, why is this one character so focused, right? And you can kind of do it, but it's not always great. But when you're running a one-on-one game, you have no worry about that. You can focus on that one character and it works really well. So I'm very excited to see Wizards of the Coast, who the publisher of the number one RPG, the number one most popular RPG, that is putting out a book that has 3 new one-on-one adventures in it, is helping to show people that you can play one-on-one adventures. And I am a big supporter of that. I think it is a really, really valuable thing to do. And it makes me far more excited for this book than I was previously. I was not unexcited for it. I just thought, oh, it's another book full of adventures, similar to many books of adventures that many different publishers are putting out. But the fact that they're putting 3 solo adventures, or 3 they call them solo. I wish they called them one-on-one adventures, because solo is true solo. Solo is just you by yourself. That is truly resilient. If you can play an RPG by yourself, and now you don't have to worry about scheduling. And there are games you can do it. Solo Dark is a Shadow Dark version where you can play Shadow Dark solo. Really fun. I wanted to offer some quick tips for running one-on-one games, because, and I'll link to these down in the show notes, because I love this style of play so much. I wanted to talk about some tips for running one-on-one games. Again, I think running one-on-one games is a fantastic way to play RPGs, fantastic way to play D&D, and there's a few things you can do that I think make running one-on-one games really good. And again, advantages. It's easier to find a group. Scheduling is easier. It's much faster to play. You can focus the game on the main character. It's very flexible, and you can tailor the whole game around the player. So my number one tip is to run with a sidekick. And the idea here is that there are 2 characters. The player is really role-playing one of those characters, and they have a sidekick. And the sidekick is a player that is controlled by the player mechanically, but role-played by the game master. And that way you have an NPC who's always there, who's able to kind of banter back and forth with the main player character. So the player still has one character they control, and they have a sidekick. Now, the sidekick will do what the player tells them to do. This is your Batman and Robin and your Sherlock Holmes and Watson style, right? Works really, really well. Sidekicks are great. It gives the characters more resiliency because there are 2 of them rather than 1. It's a lot less likely they're going to get wiped out. So I really like sidekicks. A sidekick can basically just be a simple character that the player can still level them up. The players can still decide what they do. Generally speaking, you would say that you want the sidekick to be a less complex character than the main character. So it works really well. And your sidekick can shore up the things that your main character cannot do. You're Fafhrd in the Grey Mouser style, right? You've got a rogue and a fighter. You've got your cleric and your paladin. You've got your wizard and your barbarian. You can kind of choose 2 classes that really complement one another, and then have the sidekick be the simpler of those 2, who's role played by the game master. That is probably my big tip. Another one is this idea, which I call the Sherlock Holmes and Watson style of one-on-one play. It's a very simple model for running one-on-one games. And the idea is that the character is playing a Sherlock Holmes-like character, basically a private investigator, a mercenary, a sword for hire, a sage for hire, something like that. And the Watson character, role played by the game master, goes and finds new jobs. And so you can basically break it up into 3 phases of play. In phase 1, you prepare 3 job descriptions. In this case, your Watson-like character says, hey, boss, we have 3 new jobs to pick up. There are 3 new things, 3 new clients that have things they want us to do, right? And the character says, okay. And the player gets to decide which one of those quests they want to go on. Which job do they want to go on? Which NPC do they want to talk to? Who they want to hire? They choose the job, right? And that's the phase. And you could do that while taking a walk. You can do that over the phone. There's no mechanics, right? You just describe them, the character. You could do it virtually. You could do it over email, right? You could still role play back and forth. But you can do this phase in any style of play that you want. Then 2, now the player has decided which job to take. You now have this next phase, which is filling out the job description and meeting with the patron. And this is, again, a Sherlock Holmes style where you meet with the client, you're talking to the client, you're getting the details of the job, you're understanding the full scope of what's going on. You meet with the patron. This, again, could be handled. This is a role play focused thing, so it probably works better in person or synchronously rather than like through email or anything like that. You could do it in email, but it works better if you're doing it either face to face or online or in a chat or again on the phone or something like that. But even text chat, you could do it in Discord over a text chat if you wanted to. And basically the GM, the player is asking, the character is asking questions to this NPC, the NPC is answering the questions and filling out all the details. 15 to 30 minutes of gameplay for that one, right? Then you have the job. Then step 3 is actually running the scenario. And this would play out much more like a typical D&D scenario where the character goes and does the thing. The sidekick goes with them. You can use maps, you have adventures, you have quests and everything like that, and you go on them and you run the adventure. I have played a number of games like this. My wife and I, during COVID, when it was harder for us to get groups together, played a one-on-one game like this, and it was delightful. We had so much fun. It works really well. It gives a lot of agency to the character. It gives lots of agency to the player, and is a nice, fun model that kind of fits that 3-2-1 quest model that I talked about previously, where you're offering up 3 quests to the player, they pick one, then you offer 2, then they pick one of those, and you throw the third one out. And it gives a lot of agency to the player to decide what kind of adventures they want to go on. It works really well. It's a good style. So that is one-on-one play. So I'm both very happy to see that Dragon Delve Solo is going to have this, and I also hope that you enjoy these tips on how to play a one-on-one game, and I really hope you'll try it out. Make it a New Year's, we're like halfway through the year, so it's too late, but make a New Year's resolution to try some one-on-one RPGs or one-on-one games. Just try it out. Pick a friend. If you're having trouble finding a game, pick a friend and play a game. Let's do some patron questions. Every quarter, I put up a new thread on the Sly Flourish Patreon site. You can get access by becoming a patron of Sly Flourish. It's awesome. Any patron can ask any RPG-related question there. I try to limit it to 1 question per month, and I answer every question that goes up there every Friday, and some of those questions I bring here. We just started a new quarter beginning of April, so I've got some new, fresh questions. Eldrick Munchkin says, what do you think about running a D&D session the lazy way with only index cards? The idea here is to split the content of the session into various cards. Sure, the original Lazy Dungeon Master book specifically talked about using index cards as a way to do your prep. You can absolutely use index cards. I use like my Moleskine notebook, which are kind of like a bound set of index cards. It's the small notebook, so it's, and you can definitely write them in there. I think it can absolutely, first of all, you choose the medium that works best for you. Like, I'm not dictating to you what medium works best in any other way. I do think there are things like trying to keep it to 1 page, trying to make it so that it's easy for you to read the notes. There's some best practices when it comes to like using your tools in order to help you with your prep. But really, what you find most useful to you is what matters. So I'm not the guy to tell you, yeah, you should totally use index cards, or no, index cards are dumb, you shouldn't use that. But I think that I think that index cards can be very effective. One thing I probably wouldn't do is like separate every single thing into an index card. You're going to have like 30 index cards, and I think that's a little unwieldy. So secrets and clues, for example, you might think, putting secrets and clues on 10 index cards would be great, and that way I can hand them out or throw them away or whatever. Yeah, but it's still kind of like 10 index cards is a bit of a hassle. You don't have them all right in front of you, so I probably wouldn't do that. But writing out like treasure on index cards, that could work really well. That way you could hand the treasure card to your player and they could just copy it down. So I definitely think that you could use index cards. I don't know if there's anything with index cards that makes them particularly more useful than other mediums for the lazy steps. I don't know that breaking it up any differently for that, other than index cards are great. I love index cards. I use them for all kinds of things, but I don't know that you absolutely that they work better than anything else when it comes to recording the steps from like the 8 steps from Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. So try them out, play with them. Play with the idea, but always be conscious of like when things are becoming more unwieldy. I have a feeling that GMs, nerdy GMs who kind of love messing around with tools and love thinking about their approaches, I think we have a tendency to hang on too closely to things that make our lives harder than they need to be. We are less likely to throw things away when we go, yeah, this is taking more time than it should. I think we're less critical of some of the tools that we use than we ought to be. So when you try your cards, really ask yourself if that's better than another way, and try the other ways out to go, oh man, it's so much easier to just use a sheet of paper. right? That's definitely something you could do. Another trick I had is I would take a single sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper and I would fold it twice, both once horizontally, once vertically. So it made like a little booklet. And then I would use like the 4 pages of that booklet for all my stuff. Like I could have my characters on one page, my strong start and scenes on another page. My other page could be secrets and clues. Another page could be locations and NPCs, and the last page could be monsters. You could kind of separate the pages out like that. And that was kind of an effective way to sort of limit yourself to what you could do on that sheet of paper. That can work too. Ryan M says, is there a lost Forge of Foes 3-character hard challenge table? My group is a reliable trio of players, and I love Forge of Foes table on page 68 for quick combat builds like boss plus underlings columns. Did you playtest a 3-player version? If not, any advice on building my own? I'm wondering how much to consider the action economy dip of a party below 4. So no, we did not create a 3-party version. But using the lazy encounter benchmark, it's pretty easy for you to do it. And if you wanted to make a table for yourself like that, a way to do that is essentially ask yourself, like, especially the boss plus underlings side, is when you're keeping track of the 2 factors for the lazy encounter benchmark, which are the total number of challenge ratings of monsters before you get into deadly, and how the highest challenge rating monster for a particular group. If you use the highest challenge monster as one variable, which is 100% of character level, it's equal to average character level 1st to 4th level, and 150% of average character level at 5th level and above. That's sort of your boss. And then anything you have remaining, you can use for your minions, right? It's sort of a budget, right? And I don't really promote the idea of using it as a budget, but you can use it as a budget. And an example would be, let's say you had 3 7th level characters, which is 21, and we're dividing that by 2. So that's 11. And we'll round it down to 10. That you have 10 CRs worth. So I would you could split that up, for example, into a single CR7 monster. So what I realize is when you're doing it with 3 characters, it's hard to hit the challenge rating enough to be the 150%. Because 10 is about, that would mean that you would face one monster that's 3 challenge ratings higher than your average character level, and that would fill up your entire amount before it's deadly. So what you could do is just subtract a little bit from whatever that number is, and essentially you could say, I'm going to spend half of the budget on a boss and the rest of the half on minions. And that can work pretty well, right? I think that approach is probably the easiest one. If you were looking at it, you can do your lazy encounter benchmark and then divide it into 2. 1/2 is your boss, and then 1/2 of your minions. And you can raise or lower one or the other in order to have a bigger boss and smaller minions or so on. But that could generally work well. But no, we don't have a table for that, but it probably wouldn't be hard to generate like an Excel table that said, like, here are your bosses and your minions for any given challenge rating. So like if you had 3 10th level characters, let's try again, right? 3 10th level characters is a lazy encounter benchmark of 15. And if you want to split that into 2, you could have an 8 for your boss monster, would be like a CR8. And then your remaining guys, 8 minus would be 7. So you could have I guess you could round up to 16, and you could have 4 CR2s or 2 CR4s. And that would feel about right for 3 characters. So I think I would do something like that. But the main thing I would do is, if you're using the lazy encounter benchmark, that one can still help you out when you have only 3 characters. It's one of the things I really like about the lazy encounter benchmark. One of the reasons I'm such a proponent of it is that it scales in so many different ways. It scales with the number of characters, it scales with the number of monsters, it scales with the level of the characters, it scales with the level of the monsters, and you can have a mixture of different levels of characters and different levels of different CRs of monsters, and still the same benchmark works, right? It gives you a lot of flexibility to decide what you want to use. So I would use the lazy encounter benchmark to help you build your encounters for 3 characters. Jonathan D says, are the 4 main 5e systems, D&D 2014, D&D 2024, Tales of the Valiant, and Level Up Advanced 5e, truly compatible with each other? And if so, if you could only pick one player's guide, one GM guide, and one monster guide from any of the systems, but you could only use those 3 books to run 5e style games for the rest of your life, what books would those be? Jonathan D, this question causes me great pain. Of course, I'm the one that said I would talk about it on the show, so here I am. So are they, and you asked 2 questions, so you cheated. Are they truly compatible? Truly compatible is in the eye of the beholder. You have to decide what that means to you. To me, they are compatible enough. I can take a monster from any one of those systems and run it with any other system, and they would work fine. I could take magic items from any one system and use it in any other system, and that they would work fine. Spells from any system in any other system, they would work fine. I can run adventures from any of those systems with any of the other systems, and they would run fine. There are many ways that I feel that they are compatible enough that it doesn't matter. There's really only certain tricky bits, like, it's a little harder to take an ancestry from Tales of the Valiant and figure out how to work it into D&D 2024 that doesn't have ancestries. It's a little different on taking backgrounds from one system and doing it into a system that changes how backgrounds work. There's little tricky bits here and there. But I don't think it really takes that much work for a GM and their players to get together and figure out how to make anything from 5e, from any of those systems, work with the other ones when you want to. One thing that I argue about with compatibility is when you think about the widespread nature of products that came out for just D&D 2014, there was so much variance in those products alone that my question was, is there really that much of a difference between any of the other versions of 5e and D&D as there was with D&D 2014 and things like Tasha's and Xanathar's and Strixhaven, where they were changing a lot of different things, right? Strixhaven changed a lot of stuff. Spelljammer changed things. The Spelljammer is the first one where they started adding feats to backgrounds, right? That was a big change. And did it break backward compatibility? A little bit. Like, people were like, wait a minute, why if I pick an old background, I don't get a feat, but if I pick a new one, I do? They actually had to errata that. So I would say it's as compatible as anything has been with 5e. 5e is already a big, beautiful, messy soup of stuff. And I don't think these new versions make it any less compatible. You're going to run into some tricky bits, but generally speaking, I think they're just as compatible as you want. But then you ask me the really hard question. If I had to pick one player guide, one GM guide, and one monster guide, what would it be? And that's really tough. I really like D&D 2024. And one of the, it's hard for me to even answer the question without getting into like all the advantages and disadvantages of both. You have a tricky bit, which is that like Tales of the Valiant put magic items inside the player's guide and not in the GM guide. So if you were to take the GM guide from Tales of the Valiant and mix it with A5e or D&D, you're going to miss stuff because their player's guide doesn't have magic items in it. So there's little compatibility. Like, if you're trying to match the guides together, it's a little tricky. I don't know that you're going to have many people that are going to take the Tales of the Valiant Game Master's Guide alone and try to run it with D&D. I don't think that that's really rare. I will say I have now been playing Tales of the Valiant with just the Tales of the Valiant books for a few months, and I love it, and it's fine, and it's a great version of D&D. Likewise, I have played with the new D&D 2025 Monster Manual a lot in my other games, and I like it a lot too. I don't feel like the Dungeon Master's Guide for 2024 is that great when it comes to a book that I'm going to continually go back to. So you're putting me on the spot, and I reserve the right to change my mind on this, but I'm going to make a controversial statement. So be ready. Are you ready? I would say that I would like the D&D 2024 Player's Handbook. I like the Tales of the Valiant. I like the Level Up Advanced 5e Trials and Treasure book as my GM book. And I like the 2025 Monster Manual. I think those three books are really solid. Now, the reason why is that I picked the Player's Handbook instead of like Tales of the Valiant. I actually like Tales of the Valiant better, but Tales of the Valiant is missing one thing that the 2024 Player's Handbook that has, and that's the 2024 Player's Handbook has 48 subclasses. And that's a lot of subclasses. And when you mix in multi-classing, you now have this incredible range of possible character types that all exist inside one book. I feel like the Tales of the Valiant Player's Guide has too few subclasses for me. I actually like how it plays better. I like how they handle weapon masteries better. It has a whole other class that doesn't exist. So there's a lot to love in the Tales of the Valiant Player's Guide. And I would say that those are both really, really close. The same is true with the Tales of the Valiant Game Master's Guide. I love that book too. The Tales of the Valiant is fantastic. So if I found myself on a desert island with my 5 best friends, and we were going to sit there and just play D&D and eat coconuts and hunt for fish or whatever, and I found out I only had Tales of the Valiant, I would be very happy. That would be fine, right? I think it would be great. We would probably end up homebrewing some of our own subclasses though, because I don't know that there's enough subclasses to really make that game last on its own. Now, of course, they're putting out more subclasses and stuff like that, but the D&D 2024 Player's Handbook just has more character options overall, which means that book could last longer. The same is kind of true with the 2025 Monster Manual. It just has more monsters, and the monsters are really well designed. So it's hard to look at it and be like, well, that is the better one. And like, I've been running it and I love it. But boy, Tales of the Valiant monsters are really great too. So that's a really hard question, which is why you brought me so much pain. But if you're putting me on the spot, I would have to say the 2024 Player's Handbook, the Level Up Advanced 5e Trials and Treasure book, and the 2025 Monster Manual. I think those 3 books together are a really good set. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did and you want to get more stuff like this from me, please subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is absolutely free to sign up. You get a free adventure generator for signing up, and you get a weekly RPG-related email that includes links to all of the other work that I do. You can also support me directly on Patreon. Patrons get access to a ton of different stuff. Random generators, tools, the Forge of Foes monster tools, the artisanal monster database, all usable, downloadable, usable on your own machine. You can host them on a Raspberry Pi. Plus, you get adventures, scenarios, tips, all kinds of stuff you get. There's a whole dedicated podcast over there. There's a ton of stuff that I do for patrons of Sly Flourish. We have lots and lots of patrons over there getting lots of awesome stuff. We also have an awesome Sly Flourish Discord community where we hang out all throughout the week talking about RPGs. And you help me put on shows like this. You can also pick up the City of Arches now on the Sly Flourish bookstore. Sly Flourish City of Arches hardcover is now available in the US and Canada. You can get the digital package worldwide. You can also pick up any of my other books on the Sly Flourish bookstore, including Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, Forge of Foes, Lazy DM's Companion, Ruins of the Grendel Root, and more. Coffee cups, t-shirts, all sorts of stuff that you can get off the Sly Flourish bookstore. Please check that out. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Get out there and play an RPG. Maybe play it one-on-one.